For the first time, a federal court has ruled that at least some of the massive damage left in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana was the direct fault of the federal government, specifically the Army Corps of Engineers. No one disputes that the levees that were supposed to protect the city from a storm the size of Katrina did not do so. Those levees were built by the Army Corps of Engineers. But a federal law passed way back in the 20s says that the Corps can't be sued for flood control measures that it built not working. What federal judge Stanwood Duval Jr. ruled last night was that other things that the Corps did caused the levees to fail and New Orleans to flood. Specifically, back in the 60s, the Corps built a navigation channel called the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet to shorten the shipping route from the Port of New Orleans to the Gulf of Mexico. The way the Corps maintained that channel, including repeated dredging, it widened it, it eroded the levees around it, and it funneled salt water way, way, way inland, killing the marshes and wetlands and cypress forests that all over the globe since time immemorial have served the very fine purpose of sucking the power out of hurricanes and thereby protecting drier land from hurricanes' seaborne wrath. The government will appeal Judge Duval's ruling, but if it stands, the 80,000 people in New Orleans and St. Bernard Parish who live in that area that was flooded, this ruling says because of the Army Corps of Engineers' negligence, insouciance, myopia, and short-sightedness, they will have a claim to be compensated by the guilty party, in this case the federal government, for their loss. Even if the ruling doesn't stand, you can count this as a full-power roundhouse punch to the basic philosophy of how we have approached the coast, the environment, and the problem of arrogance in the face of physics. Joining us now is Michael Grunwald. He's a senior national correspondent for Time magazine. He was kind enough to join us on very short notice last night when we first heard about this ruling. He wrote the cover story for Time magazine on the Army Corps of Engineers' role in the disaster in 2007. He also covered the hurricane itself for the Washington Post. Mr. Grunwald, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
First of all, let me ask you if I've just got the essentials right. I mean, this is history and law and science, and I don't pretend that I totally understand all of this. Have I misstated anything?
I think you got the basics, Rachel. I think, you know, Hurricane Katrina was a man-made disaster, and some of us have been screaming about that for several years. Now, unfortunately, the main problems that the Army Corps had involved the way they built the levees, the way they designed them, the way they engineered them. The levees were a mess, but you can't sue them over the levees. It is true that this Mississippi River Gulf Outlet did sort of intensify and amplify and increase the velocity of the storm surge. Everybody always knew that this was really kind of a hurricane highway pointed at the city's gut. So that sort of provided a loophole for this judge to say, hey, you know, the Army Corps, you know, you're allowed legally to screw up your flood protection, but you can't build a navigation channel. It's like if you know, if a Navy cruiser bumped into these levees and broke them, you know, the Navy would be responsible.
Well, as you say, the narrowness of this ruling is mostly because of the legal constraints here and the legal precedents and the laws that prohibit you from suing them for some other specific things. But despite that narrowness, do you see this as having a bigger political impact than just the potential for people being paid compensation?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you could sort of sense in the judge's anger at the Army Corps, which he felt was misleading him, was was sort of cooking the books to try to make the case that the Gulf Outlet didn't matter, which has really been a pattern with the Army Corps. And of course, you know, those of us who have followed this, you know, we're angry about the Army Corps killing 1,000 people. Now, that said, you know, it's really hard to make the case that the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet is the best example, or even, you know, a primary example of the way the Corps screwed up. But, you know, I think this will provide a hook for people to say, hey, you know, the federal government did this. You know, this wasn't the fault of people living in harm's way. They were put in harm's way. Now, what can we do about it?
One of the things that struck me when I read your cover story in 2007 was you talking about how when the city of New Orleans was founded, it was inland and on high ground. And the thing that has happened since then, since it was founded in the 18th century, is that the Gulf of Mexico has moved inland 20 miles because of bad engineering decisions and bad environmental decisions that we've made. When we think now about responding to Katrina, rebuilding, trying to protect the city for the next inevitable storm, are we still making the same mistakes?
Well, unfortunately, there's a sort of obvious human instinct to when something like this happens. You know, the problem must be that the walls weren't big enough, and that's certainly true around New Orleans. It's a national scandal that is supposed to have strong hurricane protection, and Katrina was maybe a weak Category 2 in New Orleans, and this stuff it really played matador defense. But that said, it doesn't mean that you can put high walls everywhere, and that's really what Congress and the Army Corps is trying to do right now. They're talking about a Great Wall of Louisiana, which would unfortunately cost billions of dollars and would ultimately increase the problems. You're going to destroy tens of thousands of more acres of wetlands, and you're going to, again, sort of concentrate the storm surge instead of letting Mother Nature spread out in places where she won't cause harm, rather than kind of focusing her fury and putting everybody in danger.
And ultimately, we may find out if what we need is wetlands instead of a wall, it might be cheaper to do the right thing. This is fascinating stuff. Michael Grunwald, the senior national correspondent for Time Magazine, thanks for helping us understand this. I really appreciate your time.
Anytime, Rachel.